What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides video. I'm Kangas, and today we're talking about the 15 best champions on patch 11.13. When played the right way, these are the champions that will have an insane amount of impact on the outcome of any game. Do note that the champions of this video are generally the most meta picks for their role, and as a result, most of them are going to be picked or banned very frequently. If you're looking for champions to play that are much less contested, you can also check out our top 3 champs to main series. The champs in those videos are still strong enough to carry with, but they're low in both pick and ban rate, meaning you're more likely to actually get your hands on them. Also, for some context, this patch finally brings a huge systematic nerf to mobility. This is actually a pretty massive change that's been overdue basically since the introduction of the new items. While champs of all roles are going to be hit a bit, the role most affected by these changes is definitely top lane. Stridebreaker in particular has been such a wrench in the balancing machine that it's straight up had its dash taken away. So all of that said, otherwise immobile champions that really relied on Stridebreaker will be easier to play against. With big bad bullies like that suffering, any champ that may struggle in these matchups is being indirectly buffed. And as a result, the first champion on our OP list for this patch is Camille. Camille was already a top tier pick for us last patch due to her ability to win almost all lanes and carry incredibly hard with her 2-item power spike. Now, with Darius, one of Camille's very few counters, taking a huge hit with the loss of Stridebreaker, Camille is an even more reliable pick. Not only will you hopefully be seeing Darius a lot less, when he is picked, you won't have the risk of dying anytime you want to move up to trade with W. But anyway, enough about the Darius specific lanes, let's talk about why Camille is so broken in general. First of all, she has tools in her kit to deal with champions of all types. You can go for short, bursty trades, longer, more extended ones, or just hang back and poke with W, slowly winning the battle of attrition. Just like in lane, Camille's playstyle going into the later stages of the game is very flexible. Being able to flex to several different playstyles usually means that a champion is pretty good at everything, but not super great at anything. But in Camille's case, she excels in almost all fields. Her split pushing is pretty much unmatched, with only insanely powerful duelists like Fiora and Jax being able to go toe-to-toe with her at full build. And when it comes time to group up, the mobility from her E means that she does a lot better than her more cuttable bruiser brethren. This makes Camille generally much better in skirmishes and teamfights, as it means that she can easily reach the enemy backline, giving you an opportunity to lock down a high priority target and then give your teammates the chance to blow them up. And the second top laner on our list is somebody that we already mentioned, Fiora. Like Camille, Fiora's best builds already don't involve Stridebreaker, so she's just naturally going from good to better on this patch. But unlike Camille, Fiora isn't nearly as well-rounded. When you lock her in, your game plan is pretty much to play the split push game from start to finish. Obviously, take that advice with a grain of salt. There'll be the rare fight where it's actually worth participating in, but those situations are few and far between. Fiora has insane damage output and healing, and with a good use of her parry, you can turn an outnumbered fight into an easy win. But a lot of her strength comes from the opponents choosing to come to you in fights. In the rare instances that you have to group up and fight, stick to front-to-back fighting. Fully proccing an ult on a tank does a ton of damage to the enemy frontline while also healing up you and your team a lot. The main reason most Fioras flop so bad in fights is because they actually spend their whole HP bar being kited as they futilely try and chase down the enemy AD carry. Now, this next piece of advice may seem obvious, but I still gotta say it. When the game's going your way and you're allowed to split push, try to do so with your brain turned on. It's really easy to fall into the habit of mindlessly shoving waves and fighting anyone that comes your way, and even though Fiora is an incredibly strong side laner that can come out on top of these fights, you don't want to needlessly take risks. Make sure that you're placing wards down in the enemy jungle so that you can escape from their collapses, and when it seems unsafe to shove all the way to towers, head into the enemy jungle instead and just clear out their camps. Counter jungling is a great way to get more gold for yourself and also bleed out the enemy team's resources at the same time. Most champions will lean pretty heavily towards macro or micro, but with Fiora, you need to get good at both. You need the mechanics to time your parry perfectly in fights, but even with the best mechanics in the world, if you got no game sense, you'll find yourself staring at the gray screen a lot. Constantly dying to the mid game is one of the main reasons that people throw leads and end up losing LP. While mechanics are definitely something that you have to practice on your own, when it comes to learning the strategy part of the game, we've got you covered. With a ProGuides subscription, you get access to all of our online courses, unlimited chats with our top-tier coaches, and if you decide to book a session, you'll get a discounted rate. And there's no better time than right now, because we're running a huge deal. Just use discount code RANKUP2021 for 20% off your subscription, so head over now, pick up your sub, and start climbing the right way today. Now rounding out the top lane, we have Riven. Of all the champions on this list, or even in the whole game, Riven is by far one of the hardest to pilot. But once you master those combos and animation cancels, she is one of the absolute strongest carries in the game. If you're good enough, you can even turn hard counter lanes into skill matchups that lean in your favor. And as we've probably all seen at least once Riven gets a single kill in lane, top is pretty much done. Riven's high mobility, shield, and stun make her trading incredibly oppressive once she gets elite, and it's not long before she can pretty much straight up tower dive most champs. Outside of her 1v1 laning, Riven is also really good in skirmishes and team fights alike. Referring back to our Camille section, most top lane carries are pretty susceptible to being kited to death in fights, but Riven's dashes help easily overcome that weakness, and with her spells being such incredibly low cooldowns, not even having flash available can save squishies from her in most instances. And it's not just squishy targets that have to worry about Riven either. With Black Cleaver naturally being a part of her build, and her ult doing a massive chunk of missing HP, Riven is really good at softening up tanks too, chipping them down and then finishing them off. Now moving on into the jungle, our first pick is maybe my least favorite champion of the game, but he's pretty good right now, Shaco. When the jungle shifted to a more aggressive early game focused meta, we said that Shaco would be a top pick, and man were we right. Riot did end up pushing out a nerf for him at 11.11, but the nerf was pretty small and only affected AP Shaco. And also it did little to change how disgustingly strong AP Shaco is against dive-heavy enemy team comps, and did absolutely nothing to AD Shaco, which has a much more snowbally, unhealthy effect on the game in my opinion. So with no nerfs coming in this patch, he'll continue to be one of the best champions that you could pick if you prefer the high gank, high pressure playstyle that he brings. The most common downside for most super early game focused picks is that they fall off, but with Shaco, that is not the case. When he goes AD, he doesn't have the telegraphed approach to fights that other assassins like Elise and Rek'Sai do. With the stealth and blink on his Q, Shaco can easily reach backline carries, blow them up, and make a quick escape with the re-stealth from Duskblade. And in the event that you go AP, you still got plenty of ways to affect late game fights. Against dive-heavy enemy comps, spamming boxes around objectives makes it basically impossible for said divers to actually participate in the fight. Jumping in basically just means that they die. And aside from the defensive, more baity playstyle, you can also just jump right into fights with AP Shaco too. Once you're smack dab in the middle of the fight, use your ult and your clone is basically guaranteed to be killed by AoE damage, proccing a massive burst of damage yourself and fear on any enemies that are too close. And up next we have Fiddlesticks, who we consider to be one of the most broken champions in the entire game due to how much potential he has to carry entire teamfights on his back. His one downside is that he doesn't really provide much early game pressure, but he's also basically impossible for an enemy to directly punish in the early game. His drain makes it really easy to duel other champions that try and invade him, and the few matchups that aren't winnable in 1v1s can be avoided by just fearing the opponent and running away. Once you reach level 6 and unlock your ultimate, you'll finally be able to have the impact on lanes, and while having to play around an ult cooldown may seem like it would make Fiddle an unreliable pick in the current high-paced meta, his ult is just so OP that it more than makes up for that downtime. I mean, the fact that he can fear, silence, and do ridiculous amounts of damage means that Fiddle's ult should get a kill or two pretty much 100% of the time, as long as you're pathing to the right lanes. And once the game moves on to the later stages, it gets even easier to control how the game plays out. Early on, you may get a kill top with your ult just to see your bot lane get 2v2 killed 10 seconds later. But 30 minutes into the game, when both teams are grouped up as 5 and contesting Dragon, a well-timed ult can allow you to single-handedly wipe out the entire enemy team and put your team in the driver's seat. And our last OP jungler for this patch is Xin Zhao. He may not be quite at the god tier level that Shaco and Fiddlesticks are, since he's a bit feast or famine, but he's a very close third place with plenty of carrying power. In fact, if you can snowball early with him, he can even carry harder than our other two picks in certain situations. To be more specific, Xin's kit makes him an insanely strong duelist. His more duel-centric playstyle gives Xin certain advantages in the early game, and for this, we'll compare Xin to Shaco. Yeah, Shaco can poof over wolves, making him undoubtedly the best when it comes to actually ganking for lanes, but what about when it comes time to interacting with the enemy jungler? In the early stages of the game, Shaco has decent burst damage, but if he can't kill an opponent in that opening burst, he usually loses the fight. And most junglers won't be dying to that initial burst anyway, making it pretty much impossible to contest them at Scuttle Crabs, and making aggressive invades something that you really never go for with Shaco. But with how well he excels at 1v1s, Xin is able to take on just about any other jungler in the game to scrap for Scuttle Crab control. And with his WE combo giving him massive engaged range, he's also more than capable of going for more aggressive ventures into the enemy jungle in an attempt to completely shut them out of the game. Next up, we're moving on to the mid laners, starting out with Katarina. Pretty much all of Season 11 has been heavily dominated by melee mid laners, assassins in particular, and at the moment, Cat holds our spot as best of them all. The first point to talk about is her laning. In winning matchups, Cat can be completely oppressive, picking up kills as early as level 2 or 3 against opponents that aren't ready for how much damage she can do. And if an opponent over-respects her damage by completely conceding lane, you can just use her daggers to instantly shove the waves and look to roam instead. She has very few losing lanes, and when you do end up playing her in one, she's one of the few assassins that can lose with grace. And the reason for that is because she doesn't need to do well to carry games. While other assassins need to be fed so they can burst down a single target, Katarina's kit is designed around resets and dealing tons of AoE damage. That isn't to say that you don't want to get fed, because you definitely do, but just that winning the game isn't totally dependent on it. In teamfights, if you're incredibly fed, all you have to do is shunpo in and start ulting, but let's be a bit more realistic. Let's say you aren't fed out of your mind, and you're reliant on your daggers for huge bursts of damage. Most opponents are able to stay away from them in one-on-one fights, but in team fights, all the particles and spell effects can make it really easy for opponents to lose track of them. Hang back until you see a squishy target, usually the AD carry or support, walking near your dagger, and then go in to burst them down before they can even react. Getting that first reset is crucial to your success in teamfights, so be sure that you're not jumping in on targets that can easily prevent that from happening, kinda like Janna or Zillion. And our second OP mid laner for 11.13 is Kiana. When looking at Kiana's stats across different skill levels, you can tell that there's a bit of a mastery curve to her. Overall, across all elos, she's actually pretty bad, but when you narrow the search down to Diamond Plus, you can see her performance in games spike massively. Basically, what this tells you is that when played poorly, or even just mediocrely, Kiana is a pretty low impact champ, and you'd better off just be taking anything else. But when you play her well, you can easily start raking in the LP. So what does it take to play Kiana well? Well, the big thing that really distinguishes the good and bad players is how they play lane phase. First, you have to know how to actually trade with Kiana. The biggest mistake I see a lot of lower elo Kiana players make is that they trade by unloading all of their spells right away with an EQ-WQ combo. This combo can do a burst of damage pretty much instantly, but unless you're super fed, you will not be one-shotting opponents with it. To actually kill your opponent when you go in for all-ins early game, you'll need to get some auto attacks in there too. And that means that you want the bonus damage on hit that Kiana passively gets from her W as long as she's holding onto an enchantment. So with that in mind, instead of face rolling your keyboard in an attempt to blow up your enemies, make sure that you're holding the finishing Q for after you get in your auto attacks. And another good thing about Kiana players is their enchantment choice. The default sections for inexperienced Kiana players always seems to be the water enchant. I assume the thought process is that the root makes it easier to follow up with a second Q for a good burst of damage in a trade. Again, like with our last point, this can be good when you're already really fed, but in early laning, most good Kiana players will sit on the bush enchantment. This enchantment stealth basically gives you a permanent safety net against ganks, and most of the time junglers won't even bother messing with you when you're holding it. And another telltale sign of a good Kiana player is how proactive they are on the map. Any chance you get, you should be making a play with your jungler, either setting them up for a gank for your lane or just roaming to help them out instead. Oh, and by the way, Kiana's ultimate is particularly useful for 4-man diving bot lane. And our final pick for OP mid laners this patch is Rumble. Rumble has been absolutely bonkers since his buffs that aimed to take him into the top lane bruiser role have turned him into a complete menace in pretty much every role. He's definitely been a huge priority pick in pro play as a jungler, but what's weird is that that's the only role Riot's going for with the last couple round of nerfs. His strength as a solo laner is pretty much untouched, and considering he actually does way better as a laner than a jungler in solo queue, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But with how balance has gone for pretty much all of Season 11, I'm not really going to question that. So Rumble hits the ground running, strong from level 1 thanks to the hard pushing and trading power of his Q. As you gain more levels, you eventually reach the point where you pretty much instantly clear waves and melt anyone that tries to contest you. The lack of ability to stop you means that most opponents just back off and let you shove the wave into their tower. While they may prevent them from dying to you, it actually plays into exactly what you want. With Rumble, the name of the game is roaming, and you want to look to gank one of your side lanes anytime that your ult is up. There are plenty of early game bullies in League, and the one balancing factor that most of them share is that they normally fall off pretty hard. I mean, that makes sense, right? Good early, but bad late. But with Rumble, that is not the case at all. The ridiculous damage and slow on Rumble's ult and the big area that it covers means that he's an incredibly strong team fighter at all stages of the game. From when he gets it first at level 6, all the way up to 6 items. Just make sure that you're patient with it and wait until the enemy team is in the perfect location to drop it for max damage. Now moving things down to the bot lane, our first OP pick is Jinx. While being an immobile AD carry may leave you a bit vulnerable at times, Jinx's insane damage output gives her some of the highest carry potential of any champ. The roughest part about playing Jinx is generally making it through the laning phase, but contrary to what a lot of people may think, hyper carries generally aren't that weak in lane. It's just that the lack of mobility leaves them open to being bullied by kill lanes, especially when you get paired with an enchanter player that tries to sit behind you at all times. But if you have a support that's willing to fight with you, especially an aggressive support like Leona or Thrash, the ability to layer your CC on theirs means that you can actually become a lane bully yourself. Lane strength aside, the main goal in every game is to reach your 3-item power spike, and once you reach that point of the game, no other carry can match your damage output in teamfights, especially once you start popping off with Get Excited. Just make sure that you're positioning well, using teammates as meat shields, and always stay near your support to get buffs and peel when you need it. Now, game balance aside, Jinx is one of, if not my favorite champ to watch being played. Her ability to pop off and go completely wild in the late game teamfights is just really fun to see. And that brings us to today's question of the day. What champion do you find exciting from a spectator viewpoint? Whether it's something exciting like Jinx, edgy like Zed, or you just like something because it's off meta, let me know your answer in the comments down below. Now, Jhin started off Season 11 as the definitive best pick in the marksman role, but after some meta changes, he fell off a bit in popularity. He was by no means bad, but just not as strong as the hyper carries that filled the role, but as Jhin always seems to do, without being directly buffed at all, he's climbed back up to being a top tier pick. Some of this success could be chalked up to the early game focused jungle meta, because when early game jungles are popular, strong laners that can get priority instantly become better picks. I mean, after all, what's the point of being a strong early game focused jungler if you have to completely concede one half of the map because your laners want to farm at tower for 12 minutes? But to really bully well with Jhin, the two key points are playing for Q bounces and aiming to trade around having your 4th shot ready. The only way that you really see Jhin lose lane is when the player piloting him continues to chase for a longer trade after reloading. Instead, use the burst of speed from critting to back off and wait for your cooldowns and 4th auto to be ready again. And when it comes to Jin's W, having the ability to CC pre-level 6 as an AD carry is a really strong tool. But with its cast time and small width, it's also pretty easy to miss, so with that in mind, you'll generally want to use it to follow up on CC that your allies put out first instead. And for our last marksman, we got Vayne. Out of all the hyper carries, she is by far the most self-sufficient due to her low cooldown tumble, the knockback from her condemn, and the stealth that she gets from her ult. This self-sufficiency may make her a better pick for the type of players that prefer to 1v9 games over relying on their supports and frontliners to keep them safe. And owing to that self-sufficiency, Vayne is a lot less vulnerable to CC in the early stages of the game when compared to other hyper carries. The big downside of her is the low range that can be taken advantage of by other AD carries like Caitlyn, but the thing about Vayne is that you actually can play really aggressively in a lot of her matchups. That said, you don't want to just blindly tumble in and go for trades constantly in lane. Each lane will have to be played differently. Against low threat lanes, you can be a bit more aggressive, freely tumbling in and condemning to end trades with just a bit of extra damage. But against a more dangerous lane where the support is somebody like Leona, you'll want to sit on your condemn cooldown, saving it for any time that your opponents try to engage on you. And out of lane, Vayne is one of, if not the only AD carry where solo split pushing can actually be a good option. This does not mean that it should be your default playstyle though, but there can definitely be games where it's in your best bet to side lane. But most of the time, you'll still be most at home in front-to-back style teamfights, where you can use Vayne's true damage to absolutely melt through any frontliner no matter how much HP or armor they stack up. And now rounding out the list with our supports, we'll start things off with Lulu. At this point, I'm honestly not sure even what to say here. Everyone already knew Lulu was a strong A to S tier pick pretty much the entire season, and then they buffed her. And that was on 11.9. So here we are moving into 11.13, and there's just no sign of them ever acknowledging that mistake. Lulu is way too broken, and her ability to completely buff up a single hyper carry is absolutely unmatched. On top of that, she can totally shut down any fed diver that tries to threaten her backline. Her one weakness is that she can't polymorph a fed carry that attacks from range, kind of like poke mages like Xerath. But she can give her W to any divers like Hecarim on her team and send them in to one-shot the threat. Following Lulu, the next most broken enchanter is Janna. While she's not quite as good as Lulu as an all-around pick, Janna does have some strengths over the little Yordle. First, her trading in lane may not be as good in extended fights, but her poking ability and safety is a bit above Lulu's. Janna's W hits pretty hard as you put more points into it, and since it's point and click, you literally cannot mess it up. The obvious counter to poke is to engage, but Janna's Q is the counter to the counter. Anytime the other support even thinks about walking up to go in on you, you just shoot out your tornado and scurry away. And this should go without saying, but when you're dealing with an enemy bot lane that has kill potential, make sure you're never using your Q aggressively. The second it's down, they have a window to go in, so stick to using it to disengage, and when it's on cooldown, never move up to poke with W. Another strength that Janna has over Lulu is her ability to make proactive plays on the map. Technically, any champion can roam, but Janna's actually kind of built for it. The movement speed from her passive and W really help her get around the map, and she may not have the same kind of effect as a hook champion like Blitz or Thrash, but a well-timed Janna roam can still easily net kills for your mid laner. Something to note when teamfighting with Janna is that you have to position a lot more forward than most other enchanters, and that's because to make the most of her kit, you should be interrupting dashes from champions like Zac and Lee Sin to keep them off of your carries. If you're instead sitting in the very back of a fight to play for KDA, you aren't really helping your team, and chances are you won't be making it too far on your climb up the ladder. And finishing off our list, we got Thrash. While the first two supports are definitely easier to play, if you master Thrash, his playmaking potential is absolutely crazy. Thrash is the type of champion that is good no matter what the meta is. I mean, even when the champion is in his worst state, one tricks can always climb on him. The reason for that is he's just too well-rounded. In lane, you can fish for hooks, walk up, or even flash to force with Flay, or switch gears and go fully defensive, playing to peel and protect instead. Out of lane, the amount of disruption that he provides is ridiculous. Between your hook's cooldown reduction as long as you land it, Flay's already short cooldown, and his ult's disgusting slow, it's pretty hard for the enemy team to get past you to reach your backline. And that's only if you're played as a frontliner. In some cases, it may even be better to sit back and play for Lantern. And on that note, Thresh's Lantern is maybe the single most broken ability out of any of the supports, and that's including ults. Whether the support is Lulu, Soraka, Karma, or Janna, no amount of healing or shielding is ever going to save a flashless Jinx that gets a Jarvan and Rumble ult dropped on her in the late game. But throw out a Thresh Lantern and bingo, she gets a get out of jail free card. Just be mindful of when you need to play this way and where you should stand to do so, and I guarantee you'll get 4 honors every game. And that will wrap things up for our top 15 champions on patch 11.13. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you sub to the channel so you never miss out on our meta guides and you're always in the loop of what the best picks are. Also, don't forget to let me know what your favorite champion to spectate is in the comments down below. And one last thing, we're doing an RP giveaway in our Discord, so if you're interested, all you gotta do is sub to the channel and join the Discord through the link in the description below. That's it for today, so best of luck on the Rift, everybody. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one.